Calling all Arizona attorneys. Where are my brothers and sisters at? I hope you are ready to be educated and inspired, or at least entertained, because it is time for Cluff's Notes on Arizona Lawyer Life. I'm your host, Arizona attorney Brig Cluff. My guest today is Chad Snow. Chad is a founding partner at Snow, Carpio, and Weekly. He practices exclusively in the area of workers' compensation. Other attorneys at his firm also handle Social Security disability cases. Chad has been about as successful as any lawyer I know in the building up of his law practice. In today's episode, we discuss the coronavirus. We discuss the viability of workers' compensation claims and personal injury claims based on the coronavirus. And we also discuss how the coronavirus has impacted law firm operations. I am joined here by the legendary Chad Snow, attorney at law. I go way back with Chad. I think we met right after I graduated from college and came to Arizona State University to go to law school. What year did you graduate from?
2000 ASU.
Okay, yeah. I was 2001. So you were 1 year ahead of me, and you were also working at my dad's law firm at the time.
Yeah, I started out doing Social Security disability and then got hired by a firm doing workers' comp, and that's all I've ever done since is workers' comp.
Chad, for the benefit of our audience, the name of his firm is Snow, Carpio, and Weekly. Is that it, or is there a fourth partner in the name now, or is that?
No, it's still Snow, Carpio, and Weekly.
Snow, Carpio, and Weekly. And you guys, man, you have an amazing law practice from my perspective. It seems like you guys have a big share of the workers' comp market, and you do a great job. I've sent a lot of people to you over the years, and they've all given you glowing reviews when I've talked to them.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we have probably about 50% of the workers' comp cases in Arizona. We've got, I think, 9 attorneys in 5 different offices statewide, and we've got some really good lawyers at our firm. So,
and in workers' comp, unlike really most areas of law, it's hard to know. Like, for instance, I do personal injury, wrongful death. The universe of personal injury and wrongful death cases is very hard to ascertain because not all cases become lawsuits, and you just don't even know of the existence of some cases. But with workers' comp, that's not the case. The universe is a known quantity. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part. You know what's out there, what's an accident, and what's worth pursuing. Yeah.
And they all have to go through the industrial commission, so that's a way of kind of figuring out what your denominator is?
Well, that's the state agency that oversees the claims, and then disputes between the insurance carriers and the injured workers.
Okay. So you've got a phenomenal law practice, and for a while, I don't know if this is the case anymore. You've grown so much since the last time that we talked about it, but for a while, I have this recollection that everybody at your firm spoke Spanish. Is that still the case? If not, I'm sure there's a lot of you that still speak Spanish.
There was a time that was a prerequisite. We did about 90% Spanish speaking back in the day, but now it's probably, I think, of our 9 attorneys, I think 5 of us speak Spanish, and probably about half our staff. But that's always been an important part of our business.
Man,
frankly, that's the people doing a lot of the dangerous jobs, the roofing and drywalling and those kinds of jobs that lead to injuries, or Spanish-speaking immigrants. So that's always been a big part of our practice.
Oh yeah, no doubt. They live in a riskier world in the working world, and even in in my practice, personal injury, it does seem Spanish speaking is overrepresented in the number of plaintiffs, and I believe that the reason for that is they face more risk because of some of the similar reasons that you just mentioned in workers' comp.
It's been a good blessing for us to all be able to speak Spanish.
All right, so Chad, we are speaking right in the midst of the COVID-19 zombie apocalypse, and
I thank you for joining me here. And one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit is how you see this pandemic affecting Arizona attorneys. Specifically, let's focus on the area of workers' comp. But how do you see this playing out with, I think of, say, a nurse that works at a hospital? Talk about that.
We're starting to get calls. You know, it's interesting. We talked about it at the very beginning of the, of the outbreak and stuff. And now we're starting to get calls from people who have contracted COVID and think it's related to their work. And Arizona has a really antiquated, I think, really kind of a bizarre framework for compensating what they call industrial diseases. And it's almost impossible, I think. You know, and I've done this 22 years. I've never brought an industrial disease case. There's 6 criteria that you have to meet in order to prove that something's an industrial disease. And I mean, to put it in like a personal injury perspective, I mean, you literally have to prove that there was a singular exposure at work that caused you getting COVID-19. And I mean, common sense just says that if you're a nurse and you're dealing with, hundreds of patients, and then you go home to your family, and then you go to the grocery store, and you go to the gas station, and at some point you contract COVID-19, well, how do you prove that, a certain exposure at work was the proximate cause of you getting that disease? It's impossible. And so, it's really brought up some interesting questions as we start to field these cases and say, I mean, should we just throw up our hands to potential clients and say, hey, sorry, I think you're out of luck, because it's just the way our statute is drawn up, it's impossible for you to prove. Several states have actually, it's interesting. I know Minnesota and I want to say California, several states have passed emergency legislation that says, people in certain occupations, if they contract COVID, there's a presumption there that it was because of an exposure at work. And we, as a firm, we're very active at the legislature and trying to get changes that will help workers. We approached, our lobbyists and a couple of our legislative contacts, and we were just kind of told that, that's nothing's going to happen in that regard anytime soon, which is pretty sad. These, healthcare workers and EMTs and the different people that are really, even grocery store workers or, people that have been deemed essential workers, they're out there literally putting their lives on the line, to continue to provide these essential services without any protection whatsoever, from the industrial or workers' compensation laws. So it's frustrating as an attorney, to see people that clearly should fall within the spirit of the Workers' Compensation Act, but are excluded just because we have this, this statute that was drawn up in 1943 or something like that.
Oh man, I was really hoping that would not be the case, but it's actually a little worse than I had anticipated, because you're saying that it's not enough just to show that your exposure came at work. You need to show a singular exposure that you had at work, which is just impossible.
Yeah, and that's not even the impossible part about it. The impossible part is proving that some exposure. I mean, you could be in a worker at a nursing home where every single person has COVID, but you have, as I read through the rules again, just a few weeks ago, you would almost have to prove that it came from one of those exposures as opposed to being exposed somewhere else. COVID's unique in that it's out there in the whole community.
Right. You have to prove the negative. You have to
kind of disprove the negative. Yeah.
Right. The only time I have ever been exposed to this virus is on this occasion, and so you have to trace everybody that was at the Costco when you were there, and for the previous 6 hours before you got there, just to rule them out as potential contamination sources. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's outrageous. I definitely.
And I'm oversimplifying a little bit. I mean, but just knowing how, and I've litigated thousands of cases at the Industrial Commission, and if I'm a defense attorney, that's kind of the standard that I'm going to try and make the judge hold an injured worker to. I mean, the statute isn't written quite that strictly, but frankly, that's how it would be applied. If you look at the 6 kind of requirements that they have for industrial diseases, it almost puts you into that strict of an interpretation.
Okay, well, I'm just spitballing here, but how about this? It seems to me it is analogous in some ways to a carpal tunnel syndrome type of injury, where somebody, say you have a secretarial worker who she or he spends all their time typing on a computer, and they develop carpal tunnel syndrome. And I think that those can be viable claims, but those aren't the only times that those people ever use their fingers, right?
Right.
I mean, do you see any room for analogizing to that when you make the argument, or is it just a different type of claim altogether?
That's a good. Obviously that's a physical injury. But yeah, I mean, it's the same defense tactics that would come up, obviously you're using your hands just as much, the 16 hours a day that you're not at work. And I'm looking at in the statute 23901 right now. And one of the requirements is the disease does not come from a hazard to which workers would have been equally exposed outside of the employment. So like you said before, that's kind of the negative that you have to disprove. You have to prove a direct causal connection between the conditions under which the work is performed and the disease. And so it's just, if there was only one of those, you could probably get around it in litigation, but there's 6 that are pretty strictly written like that. And I would be surprised if any attorneys are just, falling all over themselves to take COVID cases, just because I think they're, nearly impossible to prove.
Yeah, I'm afraid you might be right. That's what my first blush take on it would be. I'll tell you, my concern, one of the concerns that I have, some of the fallout of this pandemic, is that there will be legislation that is enacted in response to this, but that it will be legislation that is designed to shield defendants where probably no further shielding is necessary, and not legislation of the kind that you mentioned earlier that could potentially help not plaintiffs, but claimants and workers' comp, which I think is common sense. There ought to be a presumption that certain categories of workers, if they develop COVID-19, they're presumed to have developed it in their work at the COVID-19 unit at the hospital that they work at,
Yeah, common sense would dictate that. But when's the last time the Arizona legislature showed any common sense?
Oh man, I wish you'd have given me some time to prepare for that one. I
know, right?
I'd have to go back and do some research.
But I mean, to that point though, Brig, I've had people ask me about that too. Do you think businesses will be liable? Do you think employers will be liable? And I mean, I think I just answered the question: are employers liable if they put employees in situations where they could be exposed to COVID? And workers' comp is a completely no-fault system. It's much different than the universe that you operate in, where you're always looking at fault and stuff like that. But even in a completely no-fault system, it's hard to prove. And people are asking me, well, do you think are businesses liable if people come in and claim to have gotten COVID there? And I think even in a personal injury sense, you're going to run into the same problems of proving causation. It's a epidemic that's everywhere. I could get it at home from my kids. How do you prove that going into a restaurant, McDonald's or something like that, is the exposure that gave you COVID? I don't know. I think there's huge problems proving causation everywhere. And so, yeah, I've seen all the talk about shielding businesses and stuff like that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that from a personal injury perspective.
Yeah, I have a lot of the people that are closest to me in my life are constantly drinking from the trough of Fox News, and I don't tune in all that often to see what they're saying on Fox News, but I feel like I get a pretty good indication of what they're saying based on the things that a lot of my friends and family members will come and talk to me about. And many of them have expressed this concern that there will be just an avalanche of litigation of personal injury lawyers bringing claims for people that contract this virus. And I certainly do see it exactly the opposite way. The personal injury case is exponentially more difficult than the workers' comp case.
Right.
Because we do have a fault hurdle that we must clear in making a personal injury case, and it's already difficult enough without that hurdle. I mean, impossible without that hurdle. So I don't see a lot of opportunity there really for personal injury claims.
Yeah, I told we were having that family discussion with my Fox News loving family just a couple days ago, and I told them, they're talking about all these laws to shield businesses and churches and stuff, and I said, I think that's just, it's a solution in search of a problem. They're not gonna, I don't see how anyone could ever prove where they got it, and like you said, that the really high burden in a personal injury sense. So
yeah, it's a solution, in my opinion, masquerading. It's a solution for another problem, masquerading
exactly.
as a problem,
Yes.
as a solution to this particular problem.
You're right.
I don't think that the businesses know. They've got smart people advising them, lawyers who are handicapping these cases. I can't imagine that they're too concerned about COVID-19 claims being brought against them, but they are concerned about getting immunity from other claims that are brought against them. And if there's a way that they can smuggle the protections from those other claims into this new legislation, then I have no doubt that that's what they will do, because as we know, in Washington and any kind of legislative arena, nobody ever lets a crisis go to waste.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit here, Chad. What about running your own office? How has this pandemic affected your operations? What are you guys doing?
Well, it's funny you say that. Don't let a crisis go to waste. We've, practically speaking, we've tried to do everything we can to keep our employees safe. We're not letting clients in the office. We have the way our office is set up, we kind of have almost a drive-through ability. So if clients, have to drop stuff off, they can do it right at the front door of our office. And then we're staggering our staff. They're working every other day, so that we only have half as many people there physically on any given day. So, practically that's how we're doing it. We sat down, my partners and I, at the beginning of it and said, hey, let's use this as an opportunity to kind of reevaluate our systems and how we do things and see if there's ways we can do things better. And it's interesting, I think one of the good things that will come out of this is people are going to see how inefficient we've been in a lot of ways, how we haven't used technology and, different things like that. And we're going to come out of it hopefully more efficient. At least in our firm, we found that doing, new client intake, we were able to convert a much higher percentage of those doing it by phone and by video than by insisting that people come into the office. Our no-show rate went from like 20-some% down to about 5%. So just things like that we've discovered that practices that we've been doing just because that's the way we've always done it may not have been the most efficient ways of doing things. The industrial commission where we go to court, I think, is realizing that in a lot of situations, video hearings and phone hearings are every bit every bit as good as requiring people to come down there in person, and you can get them done a lot more efficiently, a lot quicker. And so, those are just some of the things I think that we've, like you said, taken this crisis and kind of tried to figure out ways that we can improve and make our business better because of it.
That's phenomenal. So I'm curious, as you're on your intakes that you're doing, do your clients have any trouble with the technology? I mean, do you send them a link to a Zoom meeting? How are you doing those meetings?
For the most part, I've been shocked because, we deal with a very blue collar clientele. Like we said before, a lot of them are immigrants who, they're just not sophisticated technologically at all. And when it first was proposed, I'm like, you know what, guys, our clients aren't going to be able to figure that out. And I really underestimated their ability to do simple stuff like that. And yeah, there's a few, 10 or 20% that'll just never be able to do anything with technology. But I've been shocked for the most part. They've been able to do video meetings for intake, and then, figure out, we have a person that walks them through how to do a DocuSign, to sign retention agreements and just things like that have made our intake incredibly more, like I said, more efficient. And then also, we're converting a lot more. And so, that's a practice that we're going to keep in place even after this is over. We're going to give people the option of doing their initial visit with the attorney, either telephonically or by video. And it's turned into a great business practice.
Oh, that's awesome. So just a nuts and bolts level question here. So the technology that you're using, you mentioned DocuSign. Is that the particular electronic signing solution you're using? I know there's a few others on the market. Is that the one you guys are using?
Yeah, I think that's the one that we use there's DocuSign, and then there's one other one. And honestly, I don't know. We, as an attorney, we do the intake and talk to the client and go over the fee agreement like we're required to. But then we have an intake specialist that kind of does all the technological parts of it. But from what I understand, there haven't been any problems. So
yeah, we use Adobe Sign, which
I think it's the same similar product.
Okay. And for the meetings, are you using Zoom or are you using some other web meeting solution?
I've used only Zoom because I'm one of those technological idiots that doesn't know how to do anything else. But I know there's a couple others. There's Google Hangouts.
Yeah.
When you have multiple people on, and there's a couple others that I think some other attorneys in our firm are using. But for intake, we're doing the Zoom meetings, and you send them a link, and they click on it, and within 5 seconds you're on video with them.
Yeah.
It's really a very nice way to meet with people. It's a lot more, you feel a lot more connection than you would just over the phone.
That's awesome. And are your clients accessing those meetings from their phones? So they're holding their phones up in front of them and talking to you that way? Is that how it's going?
Yeah. Yeah. As long as they have a smartphone, it's really easy to figure out.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Now, what about, I would think that there would be a lot fewer people getting injured, having industrial injuries right now. It certainly seems there's a lot fewer people involved in car crashes right now. My phones are virtually silent right now. What are you experiencing?
We actually, ours is a little different. I think in personal injury, people call right after an accident. We usually see people about a year after, a serious injury, because that's when the insurance company starts really screwing them over. And so, there's a little bit of a lag. So we haven't noticed any yet. We're certain it'll come at some point. But a lot of the jobs that typically lend themselves to work injuries are still going. They're essential jobs, and so those people are still working. I think we don't see a lot from the restaurant and hotel. Well, we see some from the hotel. So I don't think we'll see a huge lag in terms of that, but just in terms of general economic activity, I think, it's just like in 2008, 2009, we'll see here in about a year, we'll probably see a slight downtick in new business, and we're prepared for that. The flip side is in workers' comp, that, we have kind of a recession-proof practice in that, when times are good, people want to get back to work. They're making great money. Employers are willing to accommodate, people that might have restrictions because frankly, there's not a lot of workers out there. And so, when times are bad economically, we have less cases, but in a kind of perverse sort of way, they become worth more because there's just not as many jobs for people to go back to. So kind of a different business model than what you guys have. Yeah.
Well, I've got one more topic that I'd love to get your thoughts on, and that is this is a podcast that is really directed at Arizona attorneys. And some of our listeners may be looking for ways to grow their business or start a firm. Where do you see opportunity for Arizona attorneys right now in the context of the pandemic?
You mean in terms of practice area or just in growth within our practice areas?
Well, both. Really, I'm not talking about necessarily in terms of your practice area in particular, unless you have some thoughts in that area. You've kind of addressed that a little bit already, but more generally for Arizona attorneys, are there certain practice areas that you think are going to, there's going to be opportunity in them because of the pandemic, or are there things that you think attorneys might want to explore within practice areas that they're already in?
Yeah, well, a couple. It's funny within our practice in our firm because we do workers' compensation, and then we also do Social Security disability. And we've acknowledged for years workers' comp is a dying practice slowly, as workplace safety and technology and all these things come into play. Every year there's fewer and fewer work injuries. But the other side on Social Security disability, and especially right now, that side of it is, I think, going to respond really well to this because, like I said before, there's not as many jobs for people to go back to. And so people that have a lot of restrictions that previously could have found a job, can't now. And so Social Security disability becomes an avenue for them. But within our practice and trying to stay afloat and help things grow, I think it's forcing people to be a little bit more creative as far as, as how they get cases. And, we've spent some money in some areas where we've never spent money before. Just kind of thinking, people that aren't going to go through the usual avenues for getting an attorney may be looking in those other areas. So, it's a good opportunity, I think, to reach out and do some kind of non-traditional marketing just to get your name out there. A lot fewer cases for guys like you, personal injury attorneys and stuff. You're right. There's not as many accidents happening. So you're fighting over a much smaller pie.
Yeah, that's true. It's the last thing I needed is more competition for cases.
Yeah. But we've done, and without talking too much about our marketing strategy, but, there's things that I had been planning on doing for years that I've been told are good things, just a newsletter, a firm newsletter that, not that people read it a whole lot. I get those from different places and I look at it and throw it in the trash, but, I get newsletters from different places. It's a reminder every month that, oh yeah, that guy does mortgages, or, oh yeah, this guy does, criminal law or something like that. And it just keeps the name in front of them. And so that's something I've threatened to do for years, but I've just been so busy and, complacent in our success that I never did it. And now I've kind of had a little bit more time. It's something that we're doing to, kind of redirect our marketing a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. I have spent a fair amount of time during this pandemic also writing marketing type content, not specifically for a newsletter, but really almost more of a book or treatise form talking about different personal injury law issues and procedures.
Yeah.
I think, I spent a lot of years after law school, before I focused exclusively on personal injury, I spent a lot of years doing commercial litigation. And there's just bound to be a lot of deals that get destroyed by this pandemic. And that can oftentimes lead to litigation.
Yeah, there's going to be, that's true. Interesting. A lot of stuff arise from this.
Yeah. Well, Chad, it has been a pleasure to chat with you. You sound great. I'm a huge fan of you. I'll just let my podcast listeners know Chad Snow is a freaking stud. I mean, just a great guy in every way. So I thank you for joining me here, Chad, and we should do it again sometime.
Anytime. Thank you, Brig. Thanks for the pump up. That makes me feel better.
All right. Stay healthy, amigo.
All right. Take care, brother. We'll see you. Bye.
That is it for this episode of Cluff's Notes on Arizona Lawyer Life. Thank you to my guests and listeners. Be sure to share this show with all your lawyer friends. And if you have an idea for the show, give me a call or send me an email at brig@cluffinjurylawyers.com. I'll see you soon.